Like all of you, I assumed that this day would not come for another 15 or 20 years. So, it is with an aching and still unaccepting heart that I honor today the irreplaceable Ron Spencer. We met in 88 or 89. I was doing Campy Cabaret Christmas at Jimmy's. It was to raise money for AIDS. And we needed an older gentleman to sit in a rocking chair and be the narrator. And someone suggested that I contact Ron Spencer. I wish I could remember who that someone was. I did contact Ron. I'd never met him. And he accepted immediately. And of course, did a wonderful job. Some of you may remember that. I didn't find out until much later that he had had rescheduled his dress rehearsal for the show that he was directing at his new theater down on Fountain Square. Pretty awesome. I loved working with Ron. Being his musical director for all of those years was like being in the best acting and directing class, sitting right up there in the first row. I'd love it when he would act out a bit for an actor that was having trouble with something. It was even more entertaining when it had music or dance involved. Loved that. Loved it. Of course, Ron was also on stage a lot in his own right, his stage and everybody else's in town. He never heard a note of Always Patsy Cline. He was doing Angels in America for Brian at the Phoenix. By 1993, Tots had outgrown its original home on Fountain Square, and they moved to their new location. Now, in 1993, Mass Avenue was nothing like it is today. The Betty Boop was next door. It was a dive that made normal dives look like classy places. But the theater itself had great potential. Problem was, the ceiling was too low over the stage. So we raised the roof. Yes, I mean we all brought our individual tools down and raised the roof. With Ron at the helm, nothing seemed impossible. Theater on the Square in the 90s went through what I think was a golden era. So many great shows that were held over week after week after week. I remember with Blood Brothers, we finally had to close because Amy Kern-Smith, who was the actress playing the Baron, Mrs. Lyons, was so pregnant in real life that we just had to stop the show. Ron used a lot of live musicians in his musicals at that time, which the theater could not afford. But he did it anyway. And when you look at shows like Always Patsy Cline and Das Barbecue, and so many others, you can see the difference in the shows, the actual extra spark that having live musicians on stage brought to those productions, and Ron knew that. Of course, not all of Ron's shows were successful. Their mission statement meant that you could see shows at Theater on the Square that you couldn't see anyplace else in the town, anyplace else in the state, probably anyplace else in the region. And oh, how he loved it when the protesters showed up for Southern Baptist Sissies. He loved that. It's amazing the performances that Ron got out of people. I know that When he wanted me to play Mrs. Johnston in Blood Brothers, I kept saying no because I couldn't do a North Country accent. And it was like the man had gone deaf. Sure enough, by opening night, I was the blousy, frowsy Mrs. Johnston with a North Country accent. And when they decided to do Maltby and Shire's Closer Than Ever at the theater, Ron said I should direct it. I'd never directed anything before in my life, just musical direction. But with Ron's help and guidance, my first directing experience was an awesome memory. He wasn't happy with the script for Whorehouse, so we rented the movie, and I painstakingly transcribed every line so that we could bring it back and meld it with the Broadway script. It never occurred to me to say no to Ron. And I know that many of you out there know exactly what that felt like. I also know that many of you out there have experienced the Theater on the Square wet set on opening night. Well, Ron was not a delegator. I think that he thought, possibly correctly, that no one could do it quite like he could. So he did a lot of stuff. The amount of all-nighters that the man pulled in his theater, just unbelievable. He wrote a lot in his later years. Fruits and Vegetables, Assorted Fruits and Vegetables comes to mind. There was one script that he never finished, Major Writer's Block. It was a show loosely based on his family, and he just couldn't come up with an ending that satisfied him. We all know that Ron was a charmer. We also all know that he was one of the most giving, caring people ever. Not just around the theater. His love of animals, of course, is famous. We've all seen by now the picture of little Ronnie trying to kiss the duck. But I wonder how many of you know the mouse story. It seems that Ron and Daniel had mice in the walls of the Dutch Colonial, so they treated the walls. Well, to hear Ron tell it, here comes out, teetering out this little mouse who had obviously had some of the poison, but wasn't dead yet. Ron promptly got a pillow, put the mouse on the pillow, took the pillow down to the furnace, and sat with the mouse until it died. He was good with people, too. Once when I was very, very poor, I wanted to get away for a while, and he said, go camping. And I said, with what? He said, I've got everything you need. And he did. Well, when I arrived, had I mentioned that I had never been camping before, and also that I was going solo to a primitive campground. He called the minute I arrived. He also called again when it was getting dark. That was a real long conversation. And he called the next morning to see how I had done. I have camping equipment of my own now, but I still use Ron's. I loved how Ron sang. Ron loved to sing. And he knew the lyrics to almost everything. I loved Ron when he'd come tottering into Tots on a cane because his back had gone out once again and he had a show to get up. I loved Ron when his creative eyes were bigger than his stomach for inferiority. And I loved Ron when his frustration would get the better of him and he would go off on an actor or a techie. I didn't like him very much at that point, but I sure loved him. I'll be hanging out in my hammock in Ron's sleeping bag on these warm autumn days. I hope you also find something or someplace to go or to do to reflect on how Ron touched your life. A bright, bright light has gone out of our sky, and our set pieces are significantly dimmer. Bravo, Ron. Well done. Only wish there could have been an encore.